Check 1 2 1 2. Check 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 check.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. My name is Jean Shaheen. I am the director here at the Institute of Politics, and we are the folks who run the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. Tonight is a special night, not just because of our special guest, though he certainly makes it a special night, but there's another reason, and it's because we're inaugurating a new technology this evening in the forum. Some of you may have followed that we recently unveiled our forum archive. We have about 25 years of past forums that are now available on the web to view in their entirety. You can search them either by topic or by person, and we hope you will visit our forum archive. But tonight we're adding a new technology to that, and that is podcasting. And all of you know what podcasting is. We're trying to keep up with the students here, you know. And we thought it was especially appropriate that with our technology governor, we should unveil some new technology. Tomorrow, as you're out jogging or driving to work or going to class, all of the students who are here, you can download the podcast and listen to the forum at iop.harvard.edu. So we hope you will do that. This evening, we're delighted to present this program, A Blue Governor from a Red State and a Record of Results. Governor Mark Warner has proved the pundits wrong in so many ways, and we hope that he will do that again this evening. In addition to having him as our special guest tonight for the forum, he's going to be a visiting fellow through this week at the Institute of Politics, so we're delighted that he's going to be here for that. Thank you, Governor. Yes, hi. Now, to introduce Governor Warner this evening, we have a Harvard College student who is also a Virginian. Kate Penner is a government concentrator who is a junior here, and she's going to be introducing Governor Warner. Kate.
As a Democrat from Virginia, it is with great pleasure that I introduce our guest today. Back when I was in high school, I can remember the enthusiasm surrounding a relatively new name in Virginia Democratic politics. And normally elections aren't much fun if you're from Northern Virginia. Living in the blue tip of a very red state often makes voting for a Democrat feel like the equivalent of flushing ballots down a toilet. However, it seemed that the introduction of Mark Warner was different. He had the basic ideology of a Democrat, concern for healthcare and education, while being able to appeal to the more conservative parts of Virginia with a policy of compromise and fiscal responsibility. No one could figure out where this man had come from. Born in Indianapolis, Indiana, Governor Warner has lived in both Illinois and Connecticut. A graduate from George Washington University and Harvard Law School, Governor Warner began a career of public service working on Capitol Hill. He has had great success in the private sector as well as one of the co-founders of Nextel. His successful campaign for governor of Virginia in 2001 was largely due to his stance as a moderate Democrat, and his term in office was marked by many fiscal and social successes, including the largest investment in K-12 education in state history and a reformation of Virginia's tax code, effectively lowering food and income tax. During his career, he has chaired the National Governors Association, the Southern Governors Association, and the Democratic Party of Virginia. He played an essential role in the campaign of now Governor Tim Kaine this past fall and left office with a 75% approval rating. Governor Warner has remained in the public eye, supporting other Democrats in hopes of winning seats in this year's midterm election. And while no announcement has been made, the political world is abuzz with the talk of a potential Warner candidacy in 2008. It is with great honor that I now turn the podium over to former Governor of Virginia, Mark Warner.
Thank you. Well, first of all, Kate, thank you very much for that very generous introduction. I know what you feel like. Kate lives in Arlington, I live in Alexandria. Sometimes those are the bluest parts by quite a bit of Virginia, and that was a great, great story that you told. Thank you. And Governor Shaheen, thank you as well for your willingness to have me in as a fellow this week, and for your leadership of the Institute of Politics. I think Governor Shaheen is a great, great leader, don't you? Of course, some would say, I'm going to move away from Mike. Some would say that's because she's looking better since she's from New Hampshire as well. But Kate gave you the formal story. Let me actually fill in a few other parts of my background and a little bit of the story of how I got to be governor. Some of the things that issues we took on during the last 4 years, and I just finished as governor. I'm actually fully unemployed at this point. And obviously touch a little bit on where I think the Democratic Party nationally needs to head. And then I know with the crowd like this, there'll be lots and lots of questions about national and international issues, and I'll leave probably most of those to the question and answer period. To fill in, as Kate indicated, while proud to be governor of Virginia, and while I've lived longer in Virginia than anywhere else in my life, I actually did grow up around the country. Public schools all my life. Only member of my family to ever graduate from college. Went to college at George Washington University, where I worked for Abe Ribicoff and Ella Grosso and Chris Dodd, all from Connecticut. My dad moved around some. Actually, been particularly interesting coming back. I never would have expected to come back to, are you getting reverberation on this out there? Can you hear it all right? It's okay, because it's bouncing around back here. Never thought I'd actually be back here at Harvard, because I did go to Harvard. I went to Harvard for law school. And Went over to Hemingway this afternoon and played basketball there with some law students, which was a great trip down memory lane. But I have a unique distinction. I am the only member, I believe, of my Harvard Law School class of 1980 that didn't get a job offer either place I clerked as a summer associate. Do you know how bad you have to be not to get the, we want to at least add, I always remember one of the places I didn't completely understand shepherdizing, and the other place I was a little more radical in those days. It was a big firm in New York, and there were all the summer associates were together, and I said, let's not sell out and become corporate lawyers, let's go change the world. 2 days later, the senior partner called me in and said, Mark, we're not sure you're Breed Abbott material. I obviously wasn't. The other guy who ratted me out must have been Breed Abbott material, because I think he got the job. So I went to work for the Democratic National Committee. I did fundraising. I decided I would go into business. Again, Kate told the good part of the story. The other part of the story, right after 2 years of working for the Democratic National Committee, I decided I'd become an entrepreneur, took my life savings, $5,000, went out and invested it in a little energy startup company, and in 6 weeks I helped that company go totally broke. I went into real estate. I failed there. I fell into the beginnings of the wireless communications industry, the cellular phone industry. Again, this was 1982. Some of you were not born in 1982, which is a little frightening to me. But I will, again, always remember that time, because my law school classmates would say, who were all at very prestigious firms by this point, they would say, Warner, you're so crazy. Go get a real job. Nobody's going to ever want a car phone. They're still practicing law. And got into that industry as it started to evolve, helped to consolidate. As Kate mentioned, was one of the two guys who started Nextel, and from there started a venture capital fund. And the whole emphasis, what drove me to that was I was always intrigued by trying to see what that next new idea might be and how you build a team to actually implement on that idea. Had settled in Virginia, where my wife is from. I've got 3 daughters. I used to say 3 almost perfect daughters, but 2 of them are teenagers, so I can't say that now. Got back involved both in politics as well as business. I was a campaign manager, full-time campaign manager, one of the largest donors to Doug Wilder's historic campaign in Virginia, where we in Virginia, I'm very proud, elected still the first and only African-American ever elected this country governor of a state. I became Democratic State Party chairman a few years after that. And one thing Kate left out in terms of my background, running for governor was not the first time I ran for elective office. I ran for the United States Senate. I ran for Senate back in 1996 against John Warner. My name being Mark Warner, managed to confuse the hell out of everybody in Virginia. I got the silver medal in that race. But there was one great takeaway, and this is God's honest truth, and it will give you a little bit of flavor for those of you who've not spent a lot of time in Virginia. Virginia is a very interesting state. It's like 4 or 5 states put together. I mean, Northern Virginia is very different from downstate, very different from what we call the Hampton Roads area. Far southwest Virginia is very mountainous. It's like eastern Tennessee or West Virginia, Kentucky. But I'll always remember in that campaign, we had a bumper strip that simply said on it, Mark, not John. And honest to goodness, in Danville, Virginia one day, a little tobacco community on the North Carolina border, somebody saw the bumper strip, rolled down the window, shouted out to me and said, "Excuse me, sir, is that a biblical reference?" Well, after I lost that race, I spent a few more years having been blessed with some business success, trying to, see if I could make change from the private sector. I started a healthcare foundation that's become the largest in Virginia. Started an initiative to try to get people who are being left behind on the digital divide empowered in terms of technology issues. We went a slightly different approach than some. We decided we would try to train people in houses of worship, churches, synagogues, mosques. Started an initiative between our 5 historically black colleges and the whole technology community in the state, because our high-tech community wasn't recruiting folks from the HBCUs. They were recruiting abroad, but they weren't recruiting from the HBCUs, and we started the largest initiative in the whole country to get kids from HBCUs into high-tech jobs. It's still ongoing 7 or 8 years later. And was particularly concerned, and I've always been concerned about, I didn't think Virginia, and for that matter, this has application nationally. Our country's not going to make it if all the good jobs are in Cambridge or Boston or in my state in Arlington and Northern Virginia. If we leave behind rural America, if every young person has to leave their hometown to find a good quality job, then I think the complexion and nature of our country is going to change dramatically. So I started a series of regional venture capital funds. And my whole sense is if you can build it in Bangalore, you ought to be also able to build it in Danville, Virginia, or Martinsville, Virginia, so that you could have that capital there so that young people wouldn't have to leave. Well, after a few years of that, I decided that I would make the plunge again after a long renegotiation with my wife and kids to run for governor. And what motivates me to take the plunge in public service in a time of enormous challenge, really more than any specific issue, is two things. One is the fact that I stand before you as, sounds kind of corny, but as somebody who lived the American dream. There were those good public schools. There was a student loan program. I had a chance to try things and fail and try again. And I am increasingly concerned that in our country, that notion that everybody's going to get a shot, not guaranteed success, but at least a shot at touching the American dream, is disappearing. And I don't want my daughters to grow up in that kind of country. And I couple that with an absolute belief that politics in this country, politics in this world, have to shift. That the issues we're looking at now, and I think you can look through this prism at almost any issue, are no longer as much left versus right or liberal versus conservative. And I say this even as a very proud Democrat, and even Democrat versus Republican, and there are more issues that need to be viewed through the prism of future versus the past. Because whether we like it or not, we are living in an increasingly interconnected world where information and capital, ideas know no boundaries. And if we get these changes and these challenges right, 21st century can absolutely be America's greatest century. If we get them wrong, the folks that are left behind may never ever have the chance to get their fair shot. And I thought I could add some value with that. Now, running in Virginia as a Democrat is a challenge. To give you a quick, for those of you who are non-IOP students, Virginia is 2-1 Republican. Our legislature, we haven't voted for a Democrat for president since 1964. Every statewide elected official when I ran was a Republican. Matter of fact, my predecessor as governor was chairman of the Republican National Committee. One of our Republican congressmen was chairman of the Republican Congressional Campaign Committee. I mean, this was as red as it gets. Well, we ran a campaign that was different. We ran a campaign that started with our Democratic family. Didn't ignore anyone. We are a state that is increasingly diverse, not just white and black, but Asian, Latino. Had enormous outreach in terms of new American community. I had strong support from the business community, having a business background. But we also went to a whole lot of places that hadn't seen a Democrat campaign for ages. Those parts of South Side and Southwest Virginia that had been textile, tobacco, furniture, where the jobs were leaving, and where there had been issued from the Republicans a whole lot of social scare issues, but not a lot of hope. Now, we did a campaign that attracted some attention. I don't know if Steve Jarding's here, who did a brilliant job as my campaign manager. But we knew we had to break through. I was the guy who was the first candidate who sponsored a truck in the NASCAR race. We had a bluegrass campaign song that actually was so good that got played on the radio sometimes. We even had blaze orange Sportsman for Warner signs that said, "You hired me, I'm not going to take away your shotgun." Got some folks in Northern Virginia upset at me. But suddenly, a whole lot of folks that hadn't listened to a Democrat for a long time started to listen about, what's this guy going to really do? We won. I'll always remember being so excited. You know, here we somewhat in Virginia made something dramatic with a different kind of campaign. People said a Democrat would never win in Virginia again. I was about 2 weeks into my transition. only to find that the budget shortfall that my predecessor had said was $700 million was in reality $3.8 billion. Now, if Kate was doing the official introduction that was said, people would say, and Governor Warner persevered. Baloney. My first reaction when I heard that was, is it too late for a recount? I will not go through all the things that went on in that 4 years, but there are 3 issues that I'd like to touch on that I think have ramifications nationally. One is finances, one is what we did in education. And the third is, was that commitment to those communities that I'd campaigned on ever honored in terms of not leaving wide swaths of our state behind? In finances, we had to make hard choices. We cut more than almost any governor in Virginia history. We also launched the most extensive reform of state government, at least our state, in many decades, but I would say in the whole country. We found ways to find sustainable savings. Matter of fact, here I was the IT governor. It took me 9 months to figure out how much the state spent on IT. But we found ways to consolidate, bring in better services. And even with that reform, and by the way, Virginia in 2005, one of the days that I was very proud of, was named the best managed state in the country. And Lord knows sometimes being best managed is something that you think only might appeal to kind of the business types. But in a post-Katrina world, that basic competency of getting things right in terms of government services is more than about money. It can be life and death. But even with those reforms, even with the challenges we'd met, we still had a structural deficit. Now, in Virginia, we were on the verge of losing our AAA bond rating. We were on the verge of having our, I would argue, nation's best public higher education system dismantled. And we were on the verge of, because of our deficit, not being able to really meet the basic core obligations in the state. And this is a state where the anti-tax movement had been birthed. Talking about taxes in Virginia is a little bit about, particularly in Richmond, it's a little bit like talking about Ulysses S. Grant in Richmond. You just don't do it in polite society. But I wasn't going to be the guy that was going to drive the state into the fiscal ditch. So we put together a very extensive tax reform plan, raised some taxes, lowered others, but laid out a plan that was going to meet the long-term obligations of the state. Now, all of the press, all of the pundits, Governor Shaheen mentioned this, said, oh my gosh, Warner has just committed political harry-carry. This is going to be dead on arrival. Well, you know, a funny thing happened. People are so sick and tired of spin. They are so sick and tired of not hearing the truth from our elected leaders that a little bit of truth went a heck of a long way. Instead of having this effort shouted down, and it started with someone in the legislature saying, oh, this over my dead body, we made the case to the people of Virginia, not in a Democrat versus Republican or even a governor versus legislature way, that allowed us to say, here are our choices. I asked the people of Virginia to step up and help make this choice. 50 PowerPoint presentations later in the longest legislative session in Virginia history, and we passed the most extensive tax reform in the nation over the last decade. Not my words, Washington Post. Kept our AAA bond rating, allowed us to make record investments in education, has helped spur us to where we became at one point, depending on the month, the second or third fastest growing economy, because businesses like to have a place where you truly are fiscally conservative, somebody who meets your obligations and pays your bills. Allowed us to become second lowest unemployment in the country. And it happened because there was a willingness to take on an issue and be straight about it. And underpinning fiscal stewardship allows you to then make changes. That did lead, as Kate indicated, to the largest investment we've ever made in education. I could go on forever talking about education. There's no issue I spent more time on. There's no issue I'm more passionate about. There's no issue that I think, in terms of long-term, we must get right if we're going to maintain America's standard of living in the world. The notion that we're going to always have the higher standard of living is somehow an American birthright is not the case. It's something we got to re-earn, and particularly in a world that is increasingly interconnected. I won't go into all that, but we tried a host of new ideas in education. I'll give you a couple of examples. I can't speak to Massachusetts, but I can tell you in Virginia, one of the reasons why we have some of our schools that continue to underperform is we put our least experienced teachers and oftentimes least qualified teachers in our toughest schools. And if they get a little more experience, they then get hired away to the more affluent suburban schools. And we wonder why our underperforming schools never raise their standards. Here's what we said. We said we're going to have high standards, but we're going to do two things differently. One, we're going to do meaningful remediation. We had a thing called Project Graduation to make sure that the students who needed the extra help got it. And secondly, we said we're going to take those schools that consistently underperform, and with state resources, we're going to pay a $15,000 bonus for qualified, experienced teachers who are willing to go into those schools and stay for a minimum of 3 years. And then if everybody else improves as well, we'll pay additional bonuses. I challenged our top university, University of Virginia, to create, with their business school and ed school, a turnaround specialist program for principals to make sure they understood how to turn around underperforming schools. I've coupled that with a whole effort to re-examine the American high school. And this was the challenge I took on as National Governors Association. Again, lots in that area, but two quick things. In every school in Virginia now, not just our affluent schools in Northern Virginia, a student can earn a minimum of a semester's worth of college credit in high school and have it fully transferable to any university. You get a jump start on college. You don't have kids get senioritis. First-generation kids get exposed to college-level work so they know they could do it. You raise the bar, even the most underperforming students. We found a huge numbers who could meet those standards, and you save parents $7,000 to $8,000 off the cost of higher education. For non-college bound students, and I know this may be, again, heresy to talk about non-college bound at Harvard, but I think we've got to recognize not every kid's going to go to college. But you've got to give them some ability to get some skill beyond a high school diploma. A high school diploma is not enough. So for non-college bound students, we made sure that every kid had an option to earn not only a high school diploma, but also an industry certification along with that high school diploma. Auto mechanic, computer technician, electrician. We had 45 of them. And if that industry certification required up to a semester at the community college in addition to high school, the state will pick up the cost of that to finish out that job. You take somebody who otherwise might be a dropout and put them on a career path. Add $8,000 usually on average in terms of additional earning power. And everything we did in education, there were a host of other areas, you had to measure. So in Virginia, with the high school reforms, with the effort on underperforming schools, we did a lot of things in preschool as well, and some things on math and science. I'll give you a couple of statistics. Virginia had the largest increase in math SAT scores any state in the country. Largest increase in, or we believe the largest increase in the number of students taking AP courses, and most significantly, 24% increase in African American students, 21% increase in Latino students taking advanced placement courses. With high standards, and we didn't retreat from the consequences component, we have a 94% graduation rate from our high schools. With high standards in place, but with meaningful remediation, and we moved from 42% of our schools fully accredited to 92%. So effort, energy, relentless focus, again, I think has helped driving now Virginia into a place where it's very competitive. Third area, and last point I'll make in a couple comments because I know you're anxious to get to Iraq and global warming and a host of other issues. But people will say, well, all right, Werner, what was your best, what are you proudest most of as governor? And I'll tell you, the best day I had as governor was not actually passing the tax reform. It wasn't even, although being named best man of state was a pretty good day, but the best day as governor came about 8 weeks before I was done with the job. Because the third area that we had put enormous focus on is how do you not leave those small towns behind? And if I do nothing else ever again in public service, I'll always remember the day we went to Lebanon High School in Russell County. Now, Russell County is coal mining country. It is mountainous. It is very rural. It's the kind of place where if you got out of high school and you went to college, chances are you're never going to come back. We were able to bring 300 software design jobs to Russell County. And being in that high school and seeing those kids say, well, maybe I don't have to leave home. Maybe I can come back and raise my family here. The hope that was there made all of the ups and downs of politics, and there's plenty of ups and downs, worth it. We were able to do that because we made the education changes. We were able to do that because Virginia's got the biggest rural broadband deployment going on in the whole country. We were able to do that because we put a whole new focus not only on rural communities but on inner city communities that say, you're going to get your fair shot. Can't guarantee you success, but we're going to be there to try to help. And we have taken now every one of these communities. And I got to tell you, Southern Virginia is no different than North Carolina or South Carolina or Tennessee or wide swaths of the Midwest where we're going through this same kind of dislocation based on changing economy. We took every one of those communities that had double-digit unemployment except one down to single digit. And more importantly, we brought a whole new sense of hope. So at the end of the day, people say, well, Warner, you're a blue governor in a red state. What are the lessons you learn? One lesson is results matter. The best politics is good policy. You got to measure things. You got to be accountable. You've got to lay out the debate in the framework that doesn't turn it all into R's versus D's or political speak, but you got to make the case to your people about how government action can actually improve their lives, number one. Number two, by focusing on results, and it was the best place that this was played out was in the gubernatorial race in 2005. Virginia is the last state in the country, only state in the country that has a one-term governor restriction. I think it's a pretty dumb rule. But we had a Republican candidate who ran on every one of the social hot-button issues. He was anti-immigrant, he was anti-gay, he was anti-this, anti-that. And my lieutenant governor, great guy, Tim Kaine, ran on, let's keep this record going forward. When I got elected, there were some in Northern Virginia, in my hometown, in Alexandria. Alexandria and Arlington are the Cambridge equivalents of Virginia. They said, well, Mark, we're not sure you don't check every box on democratic orthodoxy. We're a little bit suspicious about you. Well, 4 years later, okay, you had one thing wrong, not with a 75% approval rating, with an 80% approval rating. Every Democrat in the state ran as a Warner Democrat. We had helped change the image of what it meant to be a Democrat in Virginia. We not only won the governorship, we picked up seats in our legislature for the first time in 30 years, our House and our Senate. We've won 2 more seats since that time in special elections, both seats that were held by Republicans. In Virginia now, we've made it able so that Democrats are the party of fiscal responsibility. They're the party of investing and asking for results in education and health care and in jobs. We're the party about getting things done. Now, why am I here? 1, I'm unemployed, but 2, I got pretty frustrated after the 2004 race, and I was a big supporter of Senator Kerry, an early endorser, campaign for him around the country. But I believe the Democratic Party does the party, and more importantly, the country, a disservice if we continue to put up candidates and ideas that are only going to be competitive in 16 states, and then hope everything breaks right so you might win Ohio or Florida. Because even if you win under that scenario, a president, he or she, can they really govern? What this country desperately needs at this point is someone that can not only win but govern. What this country does not need is further polarization. Now, 2 final comments, and I know I've gone beyond my 15 minutes to start. As I start traveling the country, particularly when I'm with Democratic candidates or Democratic audiences, there is such anger at the president. I understand. And they always say, Governor, tell me what you dislike most about President Bush. It's a long list. But I got to tell you, my biggest concern with our president is actually not something that he's done, it's something he hasn't done. My biggest problem with our president has been this president has never stepped up and asked us as Americans to step up. What American after 9/11, I don't care what political party you belong to, wouldn't have done almost anything to say, we want to be part of making sure that we're successful in this struggle. Regardless about what you feel in the war in Iraq, once the war started, what American wouldn't have said, all right, we all have to rally as a nation. and never again be dependent upon fossil fuels from countries around the world that dislike us. And here's the real plan where I'm going to ask us all to do something. What American, in the aftermath of those horrific images after Katrina, wouldn't have said, never again, and here's how we all can be part of a solution? Instead, we got politics as usual. Instead, we got Karl Rove saying Democrats are caught in a pre-9/11 mentality. Well, I got to tell you, I was the first American elected in this country after 9/11. It was my state, in my community, that was attacked at the Pentagon. I saw the smoke coming out of the Pentagon. It was a mile from my campaign headquarters. I'll never forget that day. I'll never forget the fear of the young people who were there, who had come to work on our campaign, who were scared to death about what was going to happen. I met with the firefighters and the families of people who were lost. I don't need Karl Rove telling me what it means about a post-9/11 world. And this country is ready for people who are going to find this way to how we move forward. You know, I think we've always faced enormous challenges in this country, but I got to tell you, I can't think of another time when there are such substantial challenges almost all happening at once. The way I kind of analogize it is that it's almost like there are these snowballs that have been rolling down a hill picking up momentum, one obviously being American security, and coupled with that, America's diminished stature in the world because of the unilateral approach of the president. Another is the absolute interconnection between, I think, a lack of an energy policy and global warming that increasingly puts not only America, but the whole world's fate in jeopardy. A third is this whole issue related to competitiveness, that it's not a birthright that we're going to have the highest standard of living. And the interrelationship to that in terms of education, healthcare, and basic creation of intellectual capital. And finally, compounding all that is a fiscal policy that no one could call legitimate or rational for the strongest, most powerful country in the world. And each of these snowballs are coming at us, picking up momentum. And what we desperately need is, again, a sense in this country, we've taken on challenges in the past, but we're going to need an ability to really not make incremental change, but substantive change to solve some of these issues. So my hope is, this year, and who knows where from here, that I can at least be one of these voices on the Democratic side, adding some ideas about how we take on these challenges. I believe with all my heart that we need a Democratic Congress and we need a Democratic president in 2008. But it needs to be a Democratic Congress and president that's not simply we are against President Bush, but that lays out a vision on where America needs to head over the next decade. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Governor Warner. We now come to the portion of the forums that is always the best part, and that is the Q&A session. I would ask that you do a couple of things. First, that you identify yourself, and second, that you ask what you have to say in the form of a question and try and keep it brief so that we can have more time for more questions and to hear more from Governor Warner. So we will go from mic to mic. There are 2 on the floor and 2 on the loges. And Governor, I'll let you call on the first questioner.
Yes, ma'am.
Governor, my name is Jamie Scott. I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. I think what you've done with education in Virginia is phenomenal. My question is, given that the federal government only funds less than 10% of education, what is your plan for education on a national level?
Well, so much for the easy warm-up questions. You know, I think education needs to continue to be a local and state function for the most part. But there is enormous power for the national government, for a national leader to use education to be an advocate from the bully pulpit. And that 10%, can go a long way positively or negatively. Again, I think I have no, and I know I will probably some folks in this room will disagree with me on this. I mean, I think the underlying basis of leave no child behind makes a lot of sense. You got to have accountability. You got to look beyond just the school and look at the populations within the school so everybody is moving forward. But boy, oh boy, again, one more case of, even if the basic policy idea may make sense, how they implement it has sure as heck been poorly executed on a whole host of areas. So, it comes back again to using that bully pulpit, using those resources appropriately. I think back to President Kennedy's call for, let's put a man on the moon. The biggest benefit of that was an enormous investment in terms of what it changed our views towards math and science in this country for many decades after that. I mean, when was the last time there truly was an education president? So I think there is an enormous opportunity to use resources, bully pulpit, and aspirational leadership to make education a more senior issue at a national level. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, Governor Warner. My name is Luke Hardig. I'm a first-year master's candidate here at the Kennedy School. My question for you is, a recent article in New York Times Magazine had you called the anti-Hillary candidate. It's been estimated that Hillary Clinton could come into the race with over $75 million in her coffers. And my question is, how are we going to hear any ideas besides Hillary's ideas with that kind of head start for the Democratic nomination?
Well, first of all, I think, Senator, I reject that classification as anti-Hillary. I mean, I think Senator Clinton's a great senator. I think she'd be a great candidate if she chooses to run. What I think that I want to try to offer, if I move forward with this, is I'm going to offer my set of ideas. I think there is an enormous opportunity and an enormous yearning for some fresh ideas in this debate. And I got a lot of them. A lot of them don't fit into the kind of all the conventional boxes. And if there's one thing that we've learned, particularly with the power of the internet, money alone isn't going to win an election. I think it's going to be the ability to put forward good ideas, the ability to call on that, make that call that I think Americans, regardless of party, are looking for on how we as a country can come together to fix some of these issues that are coming at us. And again, I look forward, if I move forward with this, to at least issuing some of those ideas. Thanks for your question. Yes, sir.
Thanks for your talk, Governor. My name is Rockford Whites. I'm a graduate of Harvard Law School who, after 2 years working, decided to resign my position to return to this area, found my own company, and do a PhD at the Fletcher School.
All right.
I'm also from the red state of Idaho, and proud
Yeah, you guys actually are probably almost a little bit redder than we are.
Yeah, we're close. I'm also a graduate of the College of William & Mary, so I have a lot of Virginia experience as well. My question to you is, for those of us who are here from red states, how can we help the Democrats build their message for our states, and in particular, the rural areas for our states?
Great question. First of all, as I know you know, it's not like Virginia is the only aberration out there. We have Democratic governors in Montana and Arizona and New Mexico and Tennessee and North Carolina and West Virginia. You go on and on. We're going to pick up more this time. Part of the problem, though, has been in many states you almost got to start with, I'm a Democrat, but. And so how you kind of make that appeal. Part of it is, I think, if we don't, as Democrats, recapture the fiscal issues, shame on us. I mean, the failure of this administration to acknowledge, the irresponsibility of their fiscal policies is overwhelming, and there is no one around that can support, I believe, legitimately support what they're doing. I think we ought to be the party again of education at the state level. I absolutely believe we ought to be the party of innovation. Somehow, the Democrats too often are viewed as the party of the status quo in this country, even though we control nothing. At least in terms of the federal government. I think it's a sin. I think it's crazy that we are 15. We were the people who invented broadband and the internet, and we're 15th in the world. I think we actually dropped to 16th recently, I read, in broadband deployment. And that is an issue that goes heart and soul, for example, to rural communities. So how do we focus on real results in some of these key areas? Nobody has talked about rural America for years. The only people who've talked about rural America have been people who've come with scare tactics on social issues. So I think we can change that debate, but thank you for the question. Yes, sir.
Hi, Chris Gay, a mid-career master's student here and a former resident of Fredericksburg, not too
All
far
right.
from your neck of the woods. I think I'm one of 3 Democrats south of the Rappahannock. You don't need to know that. Question about if you, in fact, run for national office, the first thing you're going to be accused of is not having any experience in foreign policy, the usual thing. So could you give us very, very briefly your take on 2 things? First, what is your take on the war in Iraq? Did you think it was just a bogus pretext for an oil grab, or just what exactly? And second, if you're in President Bush's chair in 3 years and the situation is more or less what it is now, what would you do differently than he's doing now?
Great question. Well, first of all, the execution of this war has been, in a sense, almost one misstep after another. Because it started with faulty intelligence, was coupled with an inability to build a true alliance in terms of a united front with even the regional countries in the area. It was compounded further by a lack of a plan of what you do after you take out the command and control of the Iraqi infrastructure in terms of Saddam Hussein. And people often ask, well, what would have happened 3 years ago? Well, I mean, I don't know anyone, if they had all of the facts of how this has played out, would have been supportive of what the president proposed. But I think what we need to look at is where we go from here. And increasingly, our options, I think, are becoming diminished. Here's where I start. 1, a failed Iraqi state is not in America's long-term interest. A failed Iraqi state that is going to be a haven for terrorists, a failed Iraqi state in the south that would be a client state of Iran, or a northern Kurdish region that potentially could destabilize Turkey, is not in America's interest. So what do we do in terms of trying to hope that there can be some successful outcome here? Number 1, we have to, at least the administration starting on this, but have to really ratchet up the pressure in terms of the formation of a government that truly does, in Iraq, that truly could be viewed as a unity government, that actually includes the Sunnis. You have to couple that as well with, I think, a recognition that that government can't be filled with people that are, particularly heading up the interior defense ministries, Shia militia leaders. That is going to be a recipe for disaster. And I think we have to make our aid, or whatever additional aid and assistance, contingent upon that government being formed. And then you have to have metrics. We have no metrics from this administration. They don't even keep track of the number of Iraqi civilians killed or wounded. So my sense is, I am not one that has said that we have to that we should at this point set a fixed date. But I also don't believe you can give this president a blank check. I think you've got to see, can this government be formed, and sometime to see if it can start to move Iraq towards a more stable state. I think stability, much more than democracy, should be the goal at this point. I think if there's one thing, again, we've learned from this president, that an election alone does not make a democratic state, whether you're looking at Iraq or whether you're looking at the elections in the Palestinian Authority. That has been a not appropriate, overriding goal of our foreign policy. And I believe we also have to recognize one of the takeaways, I believe, from Iraq is that, and I believe this would be a case not only with Iraq, but I think it could be applied to Afghanistan, it could be applied to Bosnia, it could be applied to Somalia, even back to Haiti, where, and there's some folks here I've been visiting with at Harvard about this issue, where in our force structure, where do we have any capability inside the American government, defense or otherwise, to figure out what you do after you take out the command and control of the enemy? Where is there a capability to get the water back on, the power back on, do any kind of reestablishment of civil authority? I think we have had at best a mixed record on that in the last 7 or 8 incursions that we've done around the world. And I'd love to stand up here and say I don't think America will ever have to use our forces again, but I don't think you can say that. I think you have to recognize that possibility exists, and consequently, how you frame a force structure that can deal with reestablishment of civil authority has to be part of the debate going forward. Thank you. Did I hit everybody in order? Yes.
Hello, my name is Michael Kirsch. How are you doing? I'm part of the LaRouche youth movement here in Boston, and I've been doing a lot of political organizing over the last year on the question of we need a real reindustrialization of the United States right now. My question to you comes to on the question of economics. You brought up a lot on the question of the necessity to have fiscal conservatism. A few months ago here at the Kennedy School of Government, Nancy Pelosi gave a speech on the Democratic Party's policy was going to be an innovation agenda for the Democratic Party. And my question to you is that a couple days ago, you had the CEO of Delphi, Steve Miller, try to break the contract with GM and Ford, with the UAW. And we face a severe crisis in that level of the economy right now. My question to you is, we are facing elections for the Democratic Party in November. And what kind of Democratic Party campaign can we have around actually taking a crisis like GM and Ford, what we face there, and actually launching, using that potential there, the machine tool sector, launching a national reindustrial campaign like Pelosi put forward as an agenda for the Democratic Party? And the question is, how are we going to fund it? Right, how are we actually going to fund it?
All right, let's take 2 or 3 of those points. And I'm actually very familiar with the LaRouche organizations. Mr. LaRouche is from Virginia. I have had lots of members of your organization talk to me, lecture me, proselytize me at other functions. But I think you asked some good questions. Let me try to go at it. One, the Delphi and GM solution. I mean, there's pension issues, there's labor issues, but one of the underlying issues, my belief is that if Ford and GM go under, Delphi go under, it isn't going to be our labor costs, it's our healthcare costs. And, I could spend a long time on healthcare, but let me give you 4 or 5 ideas. And this is let me not try to reflect that this is a totally coherent plan at this point, but at least there's 4 or 5 ideas that I think we need to take on in terms of healthcare. First, there's the low-hanging fruit. The fact that information technology has totally changed every other aspect of our society other than the healthcare field, which makes up 15% of our economy, is crazy. The fact that we don't have electronic medical records, the fact that we don't have good patient outcome data, the fact that we have not been able to bring that power to healthcare, which not going to solve the whole problem, but could end up shaving 6 to 8 to 9% of our cost, ought to be at least starting point, no-brainer. Second, what we need to do, I am not a supporter, I should say, of a single government, single payer system. But I do believe we need a heck of a lot more people paying, at least something. And that means whether you're the 28-year-old entrepreneur making $200,000 a year who doesn't believe you need to have any health care until you have catastrophic problems come along, there ought to be an obligation to pay. I think the companies that decide to opt out of providing health care, we need to find ways to encourage and incent them to provide at least some minimal level of health care. We need larger pooling in our healthcare system than we have right now. It's one of the reasons why I think the health savings account program is very flawed, because it allows the younger, more affluent people to kind of opt out, leaving those remaining in the insurance pool sicker, older, and more expensive. Number 3, I think we've got to separate healthcare and long-term care from each other. I spent an enormous amount of time on Medicaid. It's a challenging issue. The president picked the wrong entitlement issue to deal with. Social Security may or may not go bankrupt in 2042. Medicaid is going to bankrupt every state in the country by 2020 unless we get our arms around it. And part of that means separating out long-term care costs and making it a social and moral, and I wouldn't even take off the table, potentially legal obligation. Everybody finds some way to purchase long-term care insurance. Early on, not at 65, but at 21. Fourth thing I think we need to do is, I'm a capitalist. Let me go ahead and, anybody have any doubts? I believe risk and reward, and people who take risk ought to be rewarded. But I don't think it's fair or right that the American public pays for the research and development for the whole drug industry for the whole world. So the fact that we don't have rational drug pricing in this country is just not fair or right, and it's got to be grappled with. So from pooling to long-term care versus health care to IT to the whole question of drug pricing are all areas where we can make, I think, substantial changes in our health care system that will allow us, number one, to become more competitive. Another point on your issue. I actually, and it's an issue that I have been thinking a great deal about, and I don't have a fully thought through plan, but I do believe that the infrastructure issue in this country is one that, while not at a crisis stage today, failure to act or failure to start a debate on this a decade from now is going to be right up there with energy, education, global warming, America's stature in the world. And how we think about a national infrastructure investment program is something we need to recognize. And that goes not only from roads, Lord knows our lack of an adequate rail system in this country. It goes to our water and sewer systems, which nobody wants to talk about, but anywhere in aging cities across this country are crumbling. It goes again to broadband deployment. The ability for rural communities to actually compete is going to be based not only on the roads and rail, but are you going to have broadband? So the notion of how we could put in place a major national infrastructure program that could also be, I think, very useful as a transition for many of the people who have been dislocated from traditional manufacturing jobs is something that ought to be debated in this country. And I hope I'll have some more things to say about that soon. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. My name is Alex Getacho. I'm also with the LaRouche Political Action Committee. If you will bear with me, my question is short. We have to, I would like to get, you mentioned the Apollo space program. And the question is, in terms of the credit system that would be needed to fund that, would you go with a Franklin Roosevelt approach to the idea of a relatively fixed exchange rate system? Because this has been a big exchange, there's been a heated exchange between Felix Rohatyn and LaRouche on this question of a relatively fixed exchange system with long-term credit, low-interest credit, 25 to 50-year credit for these sort of developments, and the Apollo program is a good example. Where do you stand on this?
Actually, the Felix Rohatyn idea of creating a long-term financing tool that could be used for infrastructure investment, I think has a lot of merit.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
My question was not.
Hold on, I thought you got your question though.
No. I mentioned the heated debate between Rohatyn and LaRouche on this question because Rohatyn says that government, that's outdated. What FDR did was outdated. And the question of a relatively fixed exchange system that existed before Nixon administration versus Rohatyn's policy.
Well, all I know is I'm not as familiar with Mr. LaRouche's thoughts on this specific fixed policy, but I do know that. All right, but I do know what Felix Rohatyn and a series of folks have been working on for some time, which is a long-term financing bond that might not even be 25 years, might even be 50 years or beyond, to try to do infrastructure investments. And I actually believe that's something that ought to be put on the table. I think it has some serious merit.
We can do 2 more questions.
Thank you. My name's Sean Carberry, and I'm not a member of the LaRouche movement. I'm a current student here because of the results of the 2004 election, I think like a number of Democrats who are here currently. I want to look at something a little bit more broad. You've been talking about a number of important issues, but since 2004, there's been a big debate in the Democratic Party. What are our values? What do we stand for? Why did we lose 2004? Was it moral values? This whole debate that's been going on. And I'm curious how you would define Democratic Party values and what Democrats stand for, and again, more broadly, what you stand for as a Democrat.
I think Democrats, what makes me a Democrat was the fact that it was the Democratic Party and it was the Democratic programs in many ways that gave me the chance to get my fair shot at the American dream. And it was the Democrats that started student loan programs, the Democrats that started public school. It was the Democrats that said, you know, we ought to be a country of equal opportunity and a level playing field, and Lord knows we're not. My fear sometimes is that when we get caught in this debate, you know, and I know, boy, oh boy, I hear this all the time. I know people who keep saying, well, if we only had Karl Rove. God, no. If we only had the 3 or 4 magic phrases, I'm not sure as Democrats they're ever going to get to 3 or 4 magic phrases. You know, I do know that sometimes when I think about Democrats, I think about opportunity. I think about that fair shot. I think about, you know, fairness. My concern is that somehow those words sometimes in the political debate have become so overused that you kind of tune out on them. So what I want to try to do, or what I think the Democratic Party ought to try to be about, is not changing those values, but try to lay out with some level of specificity how we're going to make sure that that opportunity is presented to every American, that everybody's going to get the education they need, that people are going to get a chance to have some level of health care service, that we're going to be in a country that, once again, we're all proud to be Americans, but I'm not sure that many Americans are proud of how our country is at least viewed at this point around the world. And I think Democrats can be the people who reclaim that moral high ground. Now, I know that part of your question was you know, should this all deflect back to, you know, moral values, religious values? I think you have to be who you are. My faith's important to me. But I don't believe that I have to, you know, consequently quote a Bible verse in every speech. You know, I think that what I want to try to show, I think sometimes what the pundits have said is they have gotten faith and values confused. I think we got to have Democrats who are going to be comfortable in their own skin, who can hang out not only in Cambridge at Harvard, but also go to the NASCAR race or go to the county fair and go from, you know, the fair to the barrio and be able to relate to people. I think at times, rightfully or wrongfully, we have not been perceived as a party that is comfortable with small town America or is comfortable with people who've been left behind. And, you know, I think that's going to change by who we put forward and the type of ideas we put forward. I don't think it's going to come about because if we have, you know, a bumper strip slogan that's like, you know, the kind of Republican approach of 2 or 3 buzzwords. I know that's not a very articulate answer, but it's something I get asked a lot, but it's just something that I think people are, again, so tired of spin. It's more, show me who you are. Don't just talk about it, show me. And that's one of the things I've tried to do in this, as I start this discussion I'm having, is let me tell you what I've done. Let me tell you where I come from. Let me tell you the world, you know, one of the earlier questions, where was he, Chris over here, asked, you know, lack of foreign policy. What worldview do you have? My worldview is the world needs American leadership now more than ever, but American leadership that can lead not only with military, but some level of moral suasion. You know, how the diminished view that people have about America around the world is one of the I think, worst losses of this Bush administration. I come at this issue from the standpoint of somebody who lived abroad as an exchange student growing up, who did business abroad, but more importantly comes from a world that for 20 years believes absolutely that the world is a more and more interconnected place, whether we like it or not. And that there is a very appropriate role for American leadership in this world. But it's not, if there's one thing that I think the Bush policies have shown, that there is no American-only unilateral solution to global terrorism, global warming, AIDS, avian flu. It needs an America that is re-engaged and leads, but leads in some level of cooperation. So I think we can come back on, the field is ours at this point. The field is ours if we pick up and move forward, but it's got to be pick up and move forward with more than just we're against the president, we're against Bush, we're against Republicans. Let's not tell what we're against, let's tell what we're for. And again, demonstrated, I hope, with some specific ideas. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. Good evening, Governor. My name is Jenny Leland, and I am a junior at Newton South High School in Newton, Massachusetts, and I would love to work on your 2008 presidential election. My question, however...
You were the last question. I cannot believe this worked out this well.
My question actually isn't about the campaign. My question is, given all that you said about Katrina and your experience with the Pentagon on September 11th, what does our country need to do to prepare for another 9/11, another national emergency, whether it be terrorism or something like Katrina, where we had no power to prevent it?
Well, I think if some of the things I'm hearing about global warming, I mean, unfortunately, Katrina may not be the last of the natural disasters I think we will see over the next few years. It starts with your approach, number one, on what kind of people you try to attract to public service. I don't think there has ever been an administration that has had more ideological litmus tests and absolute lack of competence in basic execution of almost any policy. I mean, let me just say, I say this not as somebody who, just Democrat. I'm talking about a lot of folks who've served the president, who've left because of this fear that there is, bad news we don't want to hear. Let's shade the news a little bit. So first of all, you got to put competent people in place, give them their responsibility, have them do their job. If they don't do their job, fire them, which Lord knows, starting with Secretary Rumsfeld and a host of other folks, should have happened a long time ago with this president. At the same time, be straight with the American people in terms of what our challenges are going to be in terms of natural disaster. And have this recognition that there is an enormous wellspring of people who want to step up and help. I remember after Katrina, because during my tenure as governor, we had the worst hurricane in 50 years in Virginia, called Isabel. Now, it was nothing on a relative basis compared to Virginia. But I had my FEMA experience. So I remember trying to call Governor Barber and Governor Blanco right after Katrina. All of the nation's governors wanted to step up. I was chairman of the National Governors Association. There wasn't even any process there for us to assist. I finally sent my chief of staff down for 3 weeks to be on the ground to do whatever he could to help. I mean, there's enormous untapped reserves of people that want to help. Part of what we could do, and it goes back again to my Iraq question, this whole component of how we create, and this is, I think, goes beyond Iraq, but how we create in this country some emergency response force, whether it be in post-disaster area, or whether it be in ability to call up for a disaster to respond in a situation like Iraq, or for that matter, Darfur. How do we call on the capacity of people that can come in and help? And that may or may not, and probably shouldn't be within the DoD structure. So those are some ideas on how we might address that. I know we're closing up, but let me make this final appeal. Probably everybody here has read Friedman's World is Flat's book. I don't agree with everything in it, but I agree with an awful lot of it. And the one thing I can tell you is, for somebody who spent 20 years in the venture business and the technology business, if you think change that took place in the last 10 years was significant, you hadn't seen anything yet. The next 10 years are going to be the most extraordinary period of change, I believe, in human history. And this change is coming whether we like it or not. This is not something we can say, all right, we don't want this to come, so we're going to ignore it. It's coming. We live in an interconnected world, whether we like it or not. We live in a more diverse America, whether we like it or not. And I believe that over the last 6 years, other than responding to the threat of terror and the Iraq situation, this administration has done virtually nothing on the host of other issues that we confront as a country. And in this world that is changing this quickly, we don't have the luxury of the normal Washington approach. Here's the issue, let's study, let's debate, let's kick it to the next Congress. I would even assume Congress meets more than 2 days a week. We don't have that luxury. We don't also have the luxury of, I think, incremental change. We're going to take some significant change to get these things right. So my appeal to you, and Lord, this should be an easy ask because you wouldn't be here tonight if you weren't absolutely concerned, and I don't care what political party you belong to, is that we all have to step up. We have all been, to one degree or another, if you're sitting in this crowd tonight at this institution, we all in one way or other have been blessed or have had some of the virtues of living in the greatest country in the world. And I don't think it's an overstatement to say that some of that chance to make sure that that will still be the case 10 years from now will be in jeopardy unless we get these issues right. So whoever you like, whatever candidate you like, don't just write them a check. Don't just come to one of these things. Step up and be part of this debate. There's never going to be a time that's more important than right now. So let's make sure we take back this country. I think America is ready to once again lead. We ought to be the people leading it. And I thank you for coming tonight, and I look forward to visiting with you in months to come. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Governor Warner. Thank you all very much. Good night.